Hey guys, I'm super excited for today's pump chat because we are going to be talking about the Elvie. This is the Elvie pump. It's also known as the Elvie Original or the Elvie OG. Sometimes it's referred to as the Elvie Wireless. Elvie has two pumps. One is the Elvie Stride, which is cups with a portable motor. And then this was actually their original pump, which is a fully wireless smart pump. This pump launched in 2019 and it looks functionally the same. It has really not changed the body. There's been some slight modifications to parts over time, but very, very slight modifications. So for the most part, this is the same pump that launched in 2019. What they've done is they've updated the technology for some users. I have a lot of thoughts on this pump, a lot of thoughts. So we're going to jump right in and we're going to talk about the biggest thing for me is that my opinion on this pump depends on the platform you're running it on. If you are running this on an Android, this is 2019 technology. It has a lot of flaws in that 2019 technology. The parts have helped, but it's still 2019 technology in 2024. And for $500, I don't know that if you are running this on Android that I would value this at $500. The biggest thing with this pump is the parts design has its limitations. And one of those limitations is that with the original software, the duct bill was not cycling fast enough to allow the milk to pull through fast enough. So we had a lot of issues with leaking just because of the way that these pump parts are put together. So you have this hub that has this ring here. You can actually see, I can move the ring with the little button. That's all that's holding your bottle in place. So that is connected to this. It's holding your bottle in place. And then you have your flange, which is sitting in the pump. And it's just a little pressure seal, but that's it. Which meant if this area, which is not very big, this is a very short flange tunnel, which is actually one of the design flaws. The very short flange tunnel, it's not hard to flood this pump, especially on the original software. So if you're using it on Android, I would tell you at $500, I don't recommend this pump. Now, that said, if you're using it on Apple or on the iOS platform, they have updated this pump. They added something about, I want to say 18 months to 2 years ago called Smart Rhythms. It's been out for a while. It's been out long enough that we had a lot of experience with it. They then modified it end of 2023. And we have now a lot of experience with the updated Smart Rhythms, but it's all still locked into Apple. They keep telling you that it's coming out for Android, but at this point, I think they would have done it if they were going to do it. So with what the Smart Rhythms did is they reprogrammed how the pump functioned. There's been minimal modifications to these parts. They added a slightly better seal so that the seal used to have issues with getting wet. When it got wet, it could not maintain the suction at the top. The new seal is not as vulnerable to that. It's still an issue if you are somebody who has a heavy letdown because there is a little air hole up here that milk can easily get into. The short tunnel is a challenge for inserts. There are a lot of insert brands now though, so I would not say that is as much of an issue. We can accommodate almost all nipples with this pump now without too many sacrifices. And Elvie has come out with their own cushions, and if you fit into the Elvie cushions, my recommendation with this pump is going to be use the Elvie cushions because this was literally designed to solve a lot of their design problems, which makes sense because they made it. So with the Smart Rhythms, what we now have is we have a traditional, like you still have the expression and stimulation. You have full control of it. You're just moving it back and forth as you desire. The programming is set in that original mode so that it does a couple minutes of stimulation and it kicks over to expression. It's no big deal if you need to move it back and forth on your own time schedule based on your letdowns or what you're seeing. It's not a big deal because you have full control either from the pump or from the app, which is pretty good. It also has what we call a multi-switch, which it does a series of 3 minutes of expression or 3 minutes of simulation, 8 minutes of expression. That mode alone took this pump from 2019 technology that I would say was just really no longer on my recommended list. That multi-switch mode has been fantastic for my moms with low supply or who just wanted to pump on autopilot. It has a really good combination, and especially when you're pairing the cycle speeds, you can program this pump with the app so that if you're a level 3 mom, you put it on level 3 and it does its thing and it's fantastic. They have a mode called gentle, which actually just reduces the suction. And we're going to talk about that with some old school explanation there in a minute. But it reduces the suction and it controls the release a little bit differently so that it is a much more gentle pumping experience. Some people felt with the original pump pattern that we still see with Android that the release on this pump was not super great. So it almost felt like it was kind of like flicking at you. Some people would describe it almost like a sharp little release. A lot of people didn't like it. They had to use it with vibrating massagers to help reduce that stimulation because it was not comfortable. We're not getting those complaints with the smart rhythms, I think because they changed how they control the release. But programming goes a long way. This pump itself, I'm telling you, I have two different opinions on it because when you change the programming, you've changed the functionality of the pump by such that this pump in and of itself is not, it's two different pumps because the programming is so different. And then finally with the smart rhythms, you have one that's called Express and Collect. So Express and Collect is using this sensor down here on the bottom. Like this is not just a little rainbow decoration in black. What this is it's an infrared sensor. It is trying to read the volume of milk here in the bottom. Express and Collect is their attempt to use that sensor to detect when a letdown is happening, to slow the pump and allow longer pauses to help the milk drain more quickly. That will alleviate a lot of the leaking problems. The challenge with that is the same challenge we have with all infrared technology. It's not super accurate and it's not super reliable. So like this shirt I'm wearing now is a heavy black shirt. If I use this, I'm likely to get a reliable reading with this sensor. Now, if I wear a thinner shirt, if I wear a lighter shirt and I'm in some place that there's a lot of direct light, it is more likely to mess with the sensor and we're going to get inaccurate readings. So if the sensor can't always accurately read and then we're trying to use it to control the programming, we could run into issues. I would say Express and Collect has been hit or miss with my moms. A lot of them have not really liked it. But the slight changing in programming with the way that the duckbill cycles has alleviated, I would say 80% of the leaking. We still see leaking just because you can't have something that is just a pressure design with an opening in front of it and expect it to never leak. That's not realistic. But we used to see a lot of leaking and now we see just a little bit of leaking. For most of my moms, what I recommend is if you're using this and you're out and about and you're worried about leaking, or you don't love the nice little headlight design that this gives you, I don't know how this passed their testing. Like, somebody should have told them this makes it look like your nipple is constantly erect, and a lot of people don't like that. So you just put a little disposable breast pad in front of it, and that way if it has an issue with leaking, it's leaking into a breast pad. It's not going to be a whole lot with the new smart rhythms. We're just not seeing that issue. Big issue we do have with the pump though is related to the flange design. The flange design is too short. So it's just, in order to get that low profile, we had to sacrifice length. If you have longer nipples, if you have extremely elastic tissue, this could be a problem for you. It is somewhat mitigated by the fact that the suction pattern on this pump is very light and short. A lot of people don't feel like it's doing anything, and then they pull the pump off and it turns out they got a lot of milk because it has a very light, gentle suction. Trade-off in that is it often takes longer to pump with this pump. So I have moms who can pump in 15 minutes with a Spectra, in 15 minutes with a Baby Buddha, in 20 minutes with a Willow. But when it comes to Elvie, they need to pump for 35 to 40 minutes to empty the breast. But all of those pumps may be using more aggressive suction, whereas Elvie is using a more gentle, it's really fast cycle speeds, really gentle pulls. It does get pretty good pressure. Like, we're not talking about extremely low pressure, but we are talking about, it just feels more gentle. 150 mmHg on the Elvie does not feel like 150 mmHg on the Willow. It's a very different experience because the suction pattern is different. So this is extremely gentle, but that means we do have to pump with it for longer, but we're not seeing tissue damage related to that unless we have sizing issues. In which case, if we have sizing issues, we tend to get lots of milk up here on this top membrane, just because if we've got too much going on, we're actually pulling the nipple in right underneath there. Milk sprays out in all directions. So if you've got an air hole, which you do up here, if you're using this in a hard plastic flange size, I do have some concerns because there is a little teeny tiny air hole, and I do see a lot of like pinpoint holes worn in nipples, and I've done it to myself. It's really uncomfortable, and you don't feel it when it happens until you pull it off and you're bleeding and there's a little hole that can be kind of hard to heal. So I do have concerns about this. However, these Elvie cushions are wonderful. They come in 15, 17, and 19. The Elvie hard plastic comes in 21, 24, and 28. Most people need between that 15 and the 21. Like, that is the reality, as most of my moms are between 15 and 21. And if you need a 21 size, I'm holding out hope that Elvie will catch on and give us a 21 in this cushion, because their cushions are infinitely better than their flange design. Really, they need to just make cushions in all the sizes and skip all the hard plastic flanges, because it's not working. Their hard plastic flanges they're genuinely just not great. But the cushions are awesome. So in the event that you needed the 21, which a lot of my moms do early on, what we do is we use an old even flow insert. We kind of cut it down, shove it in a 28, and fold it back. Is it a little frustrating that we're still doing that in 2024 because Elvie's not doing great research on what their market needs? Absolutely. But we can still make it work. For most people, we can still make this work. If you don't fit underneath a 21, this is not going to be on my recommended list, because there are just concerns related to this design that I can't address. And I do really take it seriously. I don't want your nipples to get those little pinpoint holes. And as long as these hard plastic flanges are designed the way they are, it's a risk. So you do have full app control of this. It actually has one of the most customizable apps that I have ever worked with. The downside of their app, and I really don't know why, is they're running the Elvie Stride and the Elvie Wireless off of the same app, but you can't run them at the same time. So if I have my Elvie Wireless hooked up to it, I can't have my Elvie Stride hooked up to it. Where this frustrates me is that we know that a lot of users of Elvie end up using both. They're very different pumps. They serve very different purposes. Sometimes what you want is not the wireless experience, because the Stride does have just a little bit more suction. So moms want to use both, and they haven't given us that with the app. Elvie does not seem to be highly responsive to consumer demand, which is why this is a 2019 pump and we still don't have a full upgrade. We still have issues with the parts. We're still having to play arts and crafts with sometimes to get our parts to fit this because of these issues. Where this pump has really, been so successful is, I'm going to give a lot of credit to moms. Moms paid $500 for this pump back in 2019 when it wasn't covered by insurance, which meant, just like we saw with Willow, moms invested a lot of money, which meant they then turned around and invested their time, their creativity, their ingenuity into coming up with ways to make this work. So we figured out you could put legendary flanges in it. We figured out if you had creaking parts, which was related to the parts warp, you could stick a piece of paper. You could stick a paper towel. You could do stuff like that to help increase the suction and reduce that motion. If your pump is creaking, it is literally, this flange design has the ability to rock, and if it warps, it makes a nice little creaking, rocking noise. But moms made this pump work. If we were relying strictly on what Elvie gave us, just like with Willow, the pump would have flopped. Moms came up with the hacks to make this pump work. It is still a good option. I have a lot of moms who, what they want is low profile. They don't want people to be able to tell that they're pumping. They don't want people to be able to hear that they're pumping, and they don't want to have to touch the pump while they're pumping. This does all of that. Like I said, it's one of the quietest pumps on the market, but it does have issues. That all of these pumps have issues, and this one has quite a few to consider. It is the only pump on the market where I tell you that the phone you're running off of it really makes a huge difference. Like I said, Android, I'd pass at $500. iOS, I mean, yeah, if you need those features and you're okay with the limitations, it could be a really good option. But I'm going to do a really old school. I'm not a graphic artist. If you've been on my channel, I am a pump expert. I am a lactation expert. I know how to help moms pump. I can explain things to you, but I'm not a graphic artist. So instead of getting a pretty little graphic, what we're going to get is a wet erase marker and a form. So what is different about this suction pattern, and what's important to know, and why people feel like it is so much more gentle? Most pumps like this, they're going to come up in suction, and then as they drop, it's not actually a controlled release. It's just the natural, the motor has stopped pulling, the parts are going to revert to their original position. What Elvie does is they come up and they actually control the first part of the release, and then it starts to drop. This is going to be closer to what we see with a piston pump. Let me put this a little closer so you can see. So this is my, beautiful rendition of traditional suction. With a piston pump, what we're doing is it comes up and it controls the downward. So there is no part of the release on a piston pump that is uncontrolled. It's completely controlled by the nature of the pump. With a traditional pump or a diaphragm membrane pump, I guess can't even call it traditional because the piston pumps actually, they're much older and more established than these diaphragm membranes. But what we're seeing is that that release, some people find that release to be painful. When Elvie had its original programming, this is what it looked like. So yes, it was gentle in the suction and the cycle speed, but it was that rapid release that was a little painful. It released just a little too fast. All they did with the new pump is they smoothed that out. When you smooth it out, you get more of that smooth, controlled pump experience. So, a lot of moms who may find that traditional pumps are painful, or they really liked the Medela Symphony, they really liked the Amita Platinum or Amita Elite, they like the Arto Calypso. They may do really well with the Elvie Wireless because that smooth, controlled suction is going to mimic that. And we do see other pumps. The Arto Alyssa is the other one that comes to mind where they've changed the programming. It is one type of motor that has been programmed to behave more like a different type of motor for a different pumping experience. So that is something to consider if you are somebody who's on the more sensitive side. This pump may well be for you if you can run it with the smart rhythms. If you can't, it may not be for you. Other thing to know with this, Elvie is, they have excellent customer service. It is actually 24/7, which I love because we move all around. So I live in different time zones. That means that it doesn't matter when I run into a pump problem. I'm not stuck with, East Coast business hours as the only option for help. At one point, they were based out of the UK and all of their customer service was run through the UK. So if you were a US mom, you had to make it work in UK hours, which is not always easy. But now it's 24/7. So I had a pump break on me at 8 o'clock at night. I just picked up the phone and called and got a live person within just a few minutes, which is, I mean, that is a standout to me. I've never had an issue with Elvie replacing parts. They do have a 2-year warranty, which is really nice. This button, this little ring, used to break a lot. I haven't had as many break now. I don't know if the part is actually improved or whether just after years and years of handling it, I just don't break them as often. But those parts are replaced super easy. However, they do change things with their programming. So when they originally released the smart rhythms, like I talked about, they had one particular suction rhythm. It actually took a pause every like 10 pulls. So it was 10 pulls of whatever suction and then a little break, which is traditional for Elvie, but it was more like 20 to 25 pulls depending on your setting and then the break. What we then saw is that they got rid of that pattern, but they kept the same smart features. So what they had figured is that that was not working well enough for enough people, so they extended it, so went back to a more traditional thing in terms of the number of pulls and the pause. But that made it seem like the pump broke. So sometimes we end up with moms who get really frustrated with Elvie because they don't always tell you what they've done with their pump, which none of these pump companies do. Honestly, it kind of burns me a little bit. But they don't tell us, so then you think your pump is broken, so then you get it replaced and it wasn't actually broken, they just changed something and their customer service didn't know. That did frustrate a lot of moms because when you change a smart pump, you change your ability to use it. So when you're using a smart pump, that is something to consider. So if you see that your pump says it needs to update, I would not update it until you know exactly what it's going to do and you're in a position where you may have to readjust. So if you're out on vacation and this is your only pump, do not push that update. Don't do it. You will set yourself up for failure. And that has been an issue with Elvie. But overall, the pump, if you're running it off of the iOS platform, is actually a pretty good contender. It's still going to win for being the quietest. They have really changed a lot of their things. They've changed the programming. I'm interested to see what they're going to come up with next because there's a lot of stuff in their patents about how they could use their sensors, and it could get to be a really advanced smart pump. We'll just have to see if they actually bring any of that to fruition, or what happens with them. I do think if they don't get their Android system up and running on the new technology, it may actually kind of kill the pump over time because you can't keep running 2019 technology in 2024 and expect to stay a leader in the industry. But that is all of my thoughts on the Elvie OG, Elvie Wireless, Elvie Pump. If you have any questions, please post below. And if you're considering this pump, definitely think about these limitations because while it can be great, it's only great if you can live with these limitations. So I hope that helps and happy pumping.